What's up, Badger fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Badgers, breaking down this 2024 football class. We got Jensen, offensive tackle, Arrowhead, Wisconsin, 6'6", about 305, 310, depending on where you see him listed. 4-star on Rivals, 3-star everywhere else. I like it. This is a really solid piece to the class. You have that 5-man offensive line class. Jensen is probably one of the ones that doesn't get quite as much notoriety, but he brings a ton to the table. Good offer list. You're looking at if Iowa offers you an offensive line, like it's a good offer list. Good size. We've talked about that. Just really this whole class. It's really nice to get offensive linemen in that you don't have to project, at least from a size standpoint, right? You don't have to worry what he's going to look like carrying 300 plus because he's already doing it, and he carries it pretty well. This is a guy that really reshaped his body, did a lot of work between his junior and his senior season in the weight room, got leaner, quicker, bigger. I like a lot of what we see on film. Let's talk about the three things we like about Derek Jensen. We do this for every prospect. The first one that I talked about it is the size. Like, it's simplistic, but man, you just can't teach 6'6", 305 with some movement skills, right? That's the type of size you want on the edge, whether it's right tackle, left tackle. I think he's a little bigger than that, maybe 6'7", 310. You just don't teach that size, and you already know he can carry it. Now, when he gets into the S&C program at Wisconsin, he's going to get stronger. He's going to redistribute some of the weight, get a little bigger, but you know the frame can hold it. You've seen it. So the size, I mean, it sounds simplistic, but that's college-sized offensive lineman coming in. That's a big deal if you don't have to project what they're going to look like on the weight. Because some people can't even put on the weight, and then you're left with a tweener who's not really too big for a tight end, but he's not an offensive lineman. You remember who was that guy in the Gary Anderson class that was like that? He came out of Washington. Was it Walker Williams? No, it wasn't Walker. Sean Kevin Estes, right? That's the prototypical. You just can't put on the weight guy. With Jensen, you don't got to worry about that. The second thing I like is he shows you in space the ability to hit more athletic, smaller players, to keep his head on a swivel, to kind of brush off that defense alignment and get into that second level, pick up a linebacker, pick up a safety, block in the screen game. There's a couple plays on his film that are really impressive for kind of a bigger right tackle type who doesn't get the athletic credit that guys like Nathan Roy or Garrett Sexton did. He gets out in space and he can move with people. He can mirror people. He can put people in the dirt, which brings us to our third point. He puts people in the dirt. We talked specifically to his head coach over at Arrowhead about his aggression, his physicality. You want nasty offensive linemen on the field. There's clips, man, where he's just taking people out of the frame of the camera. He's burying them. He's throwing them around. You just need that level of physicality on the offensive line, and he's got that in spades. So, again, I like the size. I like his ability in space. I think that's an underrated part of his game specifically. We talk about it a lot with Kevin Haywood. We talk about the feat with Ryan Corey. Jensen can do that. I don't think he's the dancing bear that maybe like a Garrett Sexton is, but I think he comes with more physicality, right? And there's a lot to like here. All right, let's throw in the film. As always, when we break down these prospects and talk about them, we always put the film up just so we can all kind of talk along together and see what we're talking about. So here's Derek Jensen. Again, kind of sealing the edge here, driving his guy into the dirt. A lot of pancakes on this film. Like, this is an IHOP factory. I love this clip. It's just, you're not big enough. Get out of my way. He just tosses him, right? Again, he's a right tackle on film. I think that's probably what he is. Here again, we talked about this in space, right? Anchoring a screen, getting out there, blocking off a cornerback, safety, whatever that was. He can do that. You can run behind him in space. He can get to the second level, here he is blocking a linebacker at the second level, helping create that crease for the Arrowhead running game. I like him at right tackle. Again, I don't think it makes as big of a difference now, right tackle, left tackle. That used to be such a huge deal. You need both, right? You need right tackles and left tackles. He has that type of frame. This is one of those clips I talked about where he's just going to take the guy to the dirt and he's going to bury him. And that wears on people. That wears on defensive linemen. It wears on linebackers. You need players with that type of leg drive, that type of physicality, that type of aggression. Just buries another guy here. You know, if there's knots on him, I think people get a little hung up on maybe he's not quite as athletic. Let's go through our recruiting kind of checklist here. Does the film back it up? Yeah, I think the film backs up what he is. I think you see a lot of clips where it's just the physicality is overwhelming. Technique, he needs to block a little lower. He needs to get a little better, but that's literally every high school offensive lineman we talk about, except for the very, very elite few. They all got to work on technique coming to college. That's why so few of them start. It's not like none of them have the size to play right away, but so few of them have that technique down well enough to block at the highest level. That's why so few of them do start. But I think he needs to work on technique a little bit, but the film to me does back it up. The offer list is pretty good. Again, you're talking Midwest schools, Nebraska, Iowa. I love seeing offensive linemen with a Duke offer. Like that shows kind of the academic side of what he could be, and that's incredibly important on the offensive line. The recruiting ranking, he had a 4-star ranking, so I think that backs it up. And then the size and measurables, again, 6'6", 310 with some movement skills. I think that backs it up. I think he checks all the boxes to be kind of that borderline 3-star, 4-star type of guy. Put him in the system for a couple years, let him develop. You can't have too many players of this type, right? That body type, strength, movement skills. You put him in the system, let him develop, see what you have in a couple years. I think there's a lot to like here. Plus, he's an in-state kid, and I know that's not the be all end all. We've had those discussions a billion times, but I have a soft spot for in-state kids, right? It just is what it is. So that's Derek Jensen. We're going to kick it over to a couple different people to talk about his game as we continue breaking down this 2024 recruiting class for the Wisconsin Badgers.
Well, and talk about the aggression. So one of the things people always say is you want an offensive lineman that's nasty, right? Someone that's going to finish blocks, is going to play hard, play with an edge. Where does that come from on the field for Jensen? Is that something that it sounds like you didn't have to coach that into him or coach him up into that?
No, I think it's just, I think it's a culture thing. I think, it must be something in the water or something in Heartland. Like, it's just, most of the kids just have that nastiness. And I think it also comes from his confidence in what he's doing, and when you're coached well, a lot of people say, like, oh, you got to teach toughness. You got to teach like physicality. Like, for me, I think all those things come when the kid is confident in what he's doing. They end up playing faster, which on film appears to be more physical. But I think like the actual natural rawness of it is probably number one from his family. His family is a hard nose. He had a brother that was one of the meanest linebackers I ever saw on the field, and his mom is hard nosed, and his dad is a great guy that has the same type of hard nosed go get it mentality. So I think it's a combination of all those things.
And then you talked a little bit about this being in the water, just he kind of came ready with that aggression. But from a technique standpoint, that feels like it's always a bit of a struggle for a high school player that is so much bigger. How much work has gone into helping him refine the technique of being an offensive lineman that is a foot taller at times than the people he's blocking?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot, but fortunately, like I told you before, that offensive line coach of ours, it's not his first rodeo, right? He was the offensive coordinator at Rhodes College in Memphis, where he coached NFL offensive linemen. He was the O-line coach at Carroll College. So this wasn't anything that was new for him. I mean, thank God I have him, like, because he is able to help on those things. I mean, even those are things that I've learned with these 6'7" guys, right? Like, people talk about training and preparing these kids. Like, when a kid is 6'7", you can't train them the exact same way as you train someone that's 6'1" or 6'2". Like, their lifting and their training needs to be adjusted a little bit. It's not always the best for them to pull a bar from the ground as far as they need to go when they're 6'7", So I learned a lot of that from Brad Arnett at Next Level. He taught me so many things about those things, and it's stuff I didn't even think about because I never had a kid that was 6'7" before, and I just am fortunate right now to have two of them. So,
and let me ask you that too: how hard is it to not allow kids who are that physically gifted to almost get lazy? Like, I don't want to say lazy is the wrong word, but a guy like Jensen or a guy like Chimre, who we're going to talk about, he could probably beat whoever he wanted without worrying about technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think once the kids start to get recruited on that level and they peak at a practice or they go to a game and they see, and there comes a point, I think, especially in the Classic 8 in our conference, like I think our conference is as close to any, as close to college as anything. I have a lot of college coaches that when I put them on our staff or they come and they coach in the Classic 8, they all say, like, this is as close to college football as it gets. And I think there comes a point even in a Derek Jensen's career where he realizes, okay, I need something more. Like, my brute size only works for so long. And then, like, if they have that next level mentality, they tend to search for what is going to help them get even better. And that's a trait that Chimray had, and for sure that's a trait that Derek has. So, Derek's just fortunate that, he has Coach Linares. Chimray had me and another high school coach that just knew high school wide receiver, play, and did our best to help him. And, so he was really smart, and he would go and find others that could help him with those things.
Well, it also seems like you guys did all right by him.
I'm sure we did. Yeah.
Since we last talked, a big in-state offensive lineman pop for Wisconsin, Derek Jensen, 6'6". I've seen him listed everywhere from 280 to 320. His Twitter says 310, so that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
6'6", 310 offensive lineman out of Arrowhead. What is this commitment for you? What did you like about his film?
Well, look, in-state kids are important. Even as you want to go more broad and national, got to take care of home first. And we've talked about this class of 24 in the state of Wisconsin. Pretty good, especially relative to most years. And it seems like most of the talent is along the offensive line. So to grab another one, I think is really important for the Badgers. And yeah, he's fun. He's fun on tape. Jensen, he's got a dual threat ability. And we don't talk about that enough with O-linemen, but you usually in smaller towns, especially, you're coming from a very specific style of offense. And usually it's run heavy, right? Especially if you've got a lot of beef on your roster. So, you see him dominant as a run blocker, and you sort of expect it, especially with that frame. But this offense that he's working in is multiple. So there are pass protection samples here. And my favorite cut of him was actually a zone blocking pass protection rep, where the defensive end and tackle stunted against him, and he had to bump one and trade him off in order to get that second rusher coming from the inside. So it showed the combination of a great kick slide, awareness, and still some aggression to help out his guard with that first wave of contact before going deeper and catching that second pass rusher. So I really like kind of the balanced nature of his game. Make no mistake, he's more comfortable in the run blocking game. He can get to the second level, moves better laterally than you would expect for somebody at 300 pounds. And there's some grit. He wants to sort of bury you, even in pass protection. He's got some upper body strength and movements that gets the defender on the ground, even when he's pass setting, which is atypical of what we get for most even Power 5 offensive line recruits. So could be over aggressive at times, but no worries there. You can dial that back. But he also does show some restraint in that regard, particularly highlighted by that rep I was talking about, where he passed off a stunt that was really designed to trick him. Because if you're over aggressive, what do? Flash the defender across his face and make him chase, with the other guy coming around for an easy sack. But Jensen was able to chip him, pass him off, and sit back and collect that second pass rusher with relative ease on top of it. So there's a lot to like here about the floor. And then technically, look, 6'6", 6'7", you're going to have to lower that pad level, especially in pass protection. That's just something across the board for taller offensive linemen when they transition from high school to college. But it's a lot of technical small things like that in terms of what you're looking for going forward from this prospect. But the foundation, the floor is really strong here. And that frame is just something you can't teach.
Yeah, and I like that you hit on the technique portion of it, because that's one of the first things I talked about when he first committed. I said he's pretty high, like he's got to get a little better, but he's also blocking 6'2", 230-pound defensive ends, right? Like some of that is just going to come naturally. I want to talk a little bit about the weight. You said, carries it well, moves well. A lot of high school kids, and I want to get into this in a little bit with Garrett Sexton, who we're going to talk about later in the show, but weight and how they're going to carry it is a big deal for offensive linemen. It's hard to project that. He seems like he carries the weight really well for a high school kid that's already over 300.
Right. So if we're believing the Twitter bio, then he's carrying 300 extremely well, more than 300 pounds, extremely well. And he's got the frame to maybe even carry a little bit more. Not that you would throw a bunch more on him, but he is carrying it well at this point. And yeah, the movement skills aren't the issue. I think his footwork and maybe the efficiency within the movement skills could use some work and fine tuning, but the actual effort and the frequency with which he moves is really solid. Again, he gets to the second level with relative ease. They even use him as a lead blocker on a few bubble screens where you're asking him as a tackle, mostly right tackle, to bubble out and go grab a secondary player. Not something you're going to ask a lot of high school 300-pounders to go do, but there are some samples of him doing it relatively well, which means you got to cover ground and get out there but before the ball is released. And that's just a catch and throw type of play. So I do like that foundation for him. Even if he does carry a few more pounds, I think it'll be well distributed and he'll be able to operate with that. Even in this type of offense, that's going to be a little bit more geared towards lengthier, slimmer O-linemen, certainly compared to the conventional thought of a Big Ten or especially a Wisconsin offensive lineman in an offense of yesteryear.
Yeah, I always want to ask you this question. We always do generally when somebody commits. He's a high 3-star player, and I think as fans, we get a little too hung up on a high 3 versus a low 4. There's really not a lot of separation there, in my opinion, a lot of times. But what do you think he's missing from an industry consensus to be that 4-star offensive tackle?
Well, look, we know the geography is playing a part here. I hate to keep bringing it up, but that's just what it is at this point. How much in-person evaluation has been done relative to Jensen compared to some of these other offensive tackles in Texas and Florida and California in particular. I think that will correct itself as we go forward. It's still April. There's a long way to go before those final January rankings sort of lock in and solidify across the recruiting industry. But, I think that's step one. Step two, yeah, he does leave a little bit to be desired on tape, just a little bit. Technically, as you mentioned, the pad level, I think the efficiency with his steps could use some work. More pass protection reps, I think, would help Jensen's case. I don't think anybody's worried about his ability to play with leverage despite that immense size in the run game. We need more pass samples, and oftentimes it's really the camp circuit that provides that for the offensive linemen, especially, those that are in run heavy or run first type offenses. We just don't have as much samples in that regard. So I do think that plays a part there as well for Jensen. And oftentimes, if you are in the minority in the recruiting industry where you are watching the offer list and you're watching who else wants a certain prospect, those that are hyper local to Power 5 programs and commit early, which all check the box in Jensen's case, you're hurt by that because there is an expectation of, hey, well, why aren't more programs in? Why aren't more schools beating down the door for this prospect? But if there was kind of an early expectation that Wisconsin was going to be in pretty good shape and they grabbed the kid in the spring, that's going to minimize some of the other schools that will show interest or continue to show interest beyond the verbal commitment. And optically, that plays a part. And unfortunately, as humans, that plays a part in the evaluation process there as well. So I do think there's some things on both what he puts out and what's around him that he doesn't have control over that are affecting that ranking. But look, high 3-stars are very good players. They are multi-year starters and eventual, guys who have a shot to play on Sundays. And that's really all you could ask for, really at any position, but especially on the offensive line, which is easily the spot where you see the most fluctuation between stars and rankings and actual, All-American NFL level production, because it's the biggest crapshoot of any position in high school and college football. Even the NFL teams. I mean, how many first-round linemen, are out of the league in 4 years? It happens at every single level because that's the hardest position to evaluate, especially with a guy who's that big playing right tackle to where you're like, can he play left? Can he work inside if he puts on more weight? How does that look in an offense that's going to be a little bit more zone blocking heavy? How much is scheme a part of the evaluation? There's so many factors and layers when it comes to offensive linemen that kind of stunt your growth as an evaluator. And I do think Jensen falls into some of those categories that aren't going to help him optically, which unfortunately do factor in down the line.